talking about the future of the restoration movement. What about tomorrow? So on behalf of CDF, my name's Sean Morgan, and I head a division there called the Leadership Capital Division. We're sponsoring this session, so I'll take a few moments of your time on the front end, and I'll get a chance to close with about a 30-second prayer at the end of the panel. But I just want to take a moment to say what CDF is up to and tell you a little bit about our story. So Church Development Fund is a 63-year-old financial-based ministry that started with a $10,000 loan back in 1953 to a church in Lomita, California. And throughout our history, we've had all sorts of highlights of innovating, and we see ways where we've innovated to help churches grow. In this season, we're talking about CDF Capital, a new name for Church Development Fund, which is based on really financial capital, the core of our history, but looking at innovation and looking forward to how we serve churches. We've started by pioneering a leadership capital division, which I have the privilege of leading, and we're in the midst of starting a spiritual capital division as a way of investing in the leaders of a church. There's spiritual capital, leadership capital, and financial capital. So without further ado, I want to introduce Mark Taylor, the editor of Christian Standard magazine, several decades, even dating back to Standard Publishing, devoted his life there in ministry. And I'm sure that publication has touched all of us in various ways and given us insights and learning. So thank you, Mark, for your role in the way you've done that and stewarded that skill and that gift. And looking forward to the panel discussion with you. Thank you.
Well, Sean, thank you very much. Wasn't that a nice introduction? Aren't we glad for the help that CDF is giving to make sure that this convention happens? It's a big deal. Well, I noticed that the NACC does not have in its list of workshops this year a prophecy track, and so this one workshop is going to qualify as the prophecy track for the NACC. No, really, when we celebrated our 150th anniversary with this April issue, Christian Standard was first published the first week in April in 1866. It marked the end of an era because the front page of that first Christian Standard also published the obituary of Alexander Campbell. And Christian Standard has been serving our fellowship of churches for 150 years. And when we did that 150th anniversary issue, we knew we were going to publish some history articles in there, pictures of all the former editors and stuff about the past. But we knew that what we were most interested in, and what you were most interested in, is this great plea that has united the restoration movement through the decades, and where is that going to take us in the future? And so that issue is full of people talking about what the future of our movement ought to be, and there's some stories of dynamic ministries happening even now. And so when we came to the North American Christian Convention, we thought it would be appropriate to celebrate our 150th anniversary by thinking a little bit about the future. And so we invited 3 of our contributing editors. We have a group of 12 contributing editors who help us plan Christian Standard each month, meet for an annual retreat, and then meet monthly and on the phone and help plan future issues. Think of themes, think of articles, think of writers, think of angles. They are out and around and know more than I can know from my one location in Cincinnati. We invited 3 of them to think with us and with each other and with you a little bit about, well, what should be the future of this movement that Christian Standard has served for 150 years. So I'm going to introduce them now, and then we'll let them talk in this order. And we've got kind of 3 different perspectives on our movement represented from these 3 speakers. Matt Proctor is president of Ozark Christian College. You all know Matt. He's looking at this from his lens as a higher Christian educator, and also he's around in the country probably in as many churches as any of us every year. Jennifer Johnson's a writer, blogger, editor. She has served with several of our parachurch ministries, continues to stay in touch with a number of you and help you with a number of your projects, and has she probably wouldn't even think she qualifies, but she has a younger person's point of view on this whole issue, at least compared to us geezers, she is.
It's getting older all the time.
Yeah, right. And then Ben Cachiaras is the senior pastor of Mountain Christian Church in Joplin, Maryland, outside Baltimore, outside Washington, D.C., and is looking at this question from the perspective of a megachurch pastor. So they're going to each talk for a few minutes. Then we'll have time for you to ask questions, or for me to ask questions of them, or for them to ask questions of each other. And we'll fill this hour quite well, I think. So why don't we ask God to bless us, and then we'll just let Matt begin. Lord, we're thankful for this movement that has given birth to the churches that have given birth to our faith in you. And we pray, Lord, that today we will think thoughts that will help us to serve you more effectively in the future, and that as iron sharpens iron in this discussion, we will be re-energized to build a future church that will give you honor. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, Matt.
Well, good afternoon. That was really sad. Let's try that again. Good afternoon. Hey, we are honored to be here, and what Mark has asked us each to do is just take a few minutes here at the beginning and try to answer a few questions. And yes. Oh, hey, we got some seats up here. Yes, those of you who are coming in the back, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, and so come on down. We want you to get some seats. If you've got seats in your row, if you don't mind scooting in a little bit and leaving the outside seats for some folks, thank you very much. We appreciate that.
Lots of seats over here.
Yeah, some seats over here. So we really we're honored to get to be here with you, and we do want today to be a dialogue. We do very much want this to be question and answer. So we're going to, like we said, kind of tee up the ball here with a few minutes of just some thoughts on a few questions. But at the end of the day, we want this to be a conversation with questions from you. And I'll go ahead and give a little bit of the preface. None of us would claim to know the future or be able to predict the future. I'm not a prophet or the son of a prophet. I work for a nonprofit. And so I cannot, there are no crystal balls in this group. But all of us do have some unique perspectives. And as Mark said, I'll just share very briefly my perspective. I get to travel. I have the privilege of getting to visit and preach in a lot of churches. I'm out probably between 40 and 50 times a year. And certainly I get to go, across the country. Last year, churches from California to Florida. But a lot of the churches that I'm in are in the Midwest. So in Missouri and Illinois and Indiana and Kentucky and Ohio, where a lot of the geographic strength of our movement would be, although we're seeing a lot of the strength out here in California and the West Coast, which is really cool this year. And so that's the perspective that I'm going to be sharing from. So the first question that Mark kind of tossed our way was this: what will the future be of the independent Christian churches? What will be the future of the independent Christian churches? And I'm a preacher, and so I just put down 3 bullet points, and I alliterated them. And so you can take these for what they're worth. But the 3 just real quick ideas that came to my mind as I thought about the churches that I have seen are these: diversify or die, develop or die, discuss or die. All right? And here's what I briefly mean by those. Diversify or die. As a guy from the Midwest, I rejoice when I come out here on the West Coast and I see some of the churches out here and the amazing racial and ethnic diversity that the Lord has brought together. I'm often at Shepherd of the Hills Church with Dudley because he's one of our graduates, and I just rejoice to see that little glimpse of heaven. When I go back home to a lot of the churches in the Midwest, I don't see that. And it breaks my heart. And that, as you well know, biblically is hugely important for us. But practically, it's important. You know that about 4 years ago, the tables turned, the scale tipped, and there are now, every year, more non-Caucasian babies born in the United States than there are Caucasian babies. And, that's a wonderful and beautiful thing. And if we want to be a movement on into the 21st century, we have to diversify or die. That's true for us biblically and missionally, but practically as well. So that'd be the first point, diversify or die. Secondly, develop or die. What do I mean by that? Develop the next generation of leaders. I'm a Bible college president. You should expect me to talk about this. And I see a vocational leadership vacuum. I am grateful for the churches that wave the banner for vocational ministry, vocational Christian leadership, for young men and women to consider using their working lives to lead the church and reach the lost, and take the gospel to the world. But to be honest, the baby boomer generation is stepping into retirement right now. You know that. And we're not even keeping up at replacement levels. I get more churches calling me than I have names to give. Hey, do you have a good person for? And you know that we're not called to be working at replacement levels. We're supposed to be, working at growth levels. We're supposed to be increasing the tribe of vocational Christian workers. Ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into the harvest field. And that's one of the things, especially as it relates to the movement. I'll let Ben, share from his megachurch perspective. But one of the things that I see just from the megachurch guys I get to hang with are, there's a generational shift coming even in our megachurch ministers. There's several of them that are going to be stepping into retirement. And who will follow them? Because that will influence pretty greatly whether that church will continue to identify with this tribe or whether they won't. Maybe they'll choose a different tribe. And so that vocational leadership development of the next generation, I think, is huge. Diversify or die, develop or die. Last little point I'll make, and I'll shut up, is discuss or die. What do I mean by that? Discuss our differences. I do think that that phone is super interesting, and I like that ringtone, and I'd like to discuss it. And but as I travel around, I have the great privilege of getting to hang out with Ben Cachiaras and with other megachurch guys. And I want to tell you, I'm a small church guy. I ministered in a small church. I attend a small church in Joplin, 150 folks, some of God's best saints there. I am so proud and so grateful for the men that God has raised up to lead the mega churches in our movement. I hope at a convention like this, where sometimes they get a lot of stage time, maybe there's griping or complaining, and I want to tell you, I count it a joy and a blessing to get to know these guys and see how God is using them. I also get to interact with a lot of smaller church guys, and there are some differences in methodology, and sometimes even differences in philosophy, how we approach doctrinal issues. Not that any of them are compromising doctrinally, but how do we approach those? And I, at times, sense a bit of a divide, a bit of a shift between some of the folks in some of the smaller churches, and I'm painting with a broad brush, so cut me a little slack here. And maybe some of the guys in the megachurch. And I don't want to see that potential rift widen anymore. And I know this is Ben's heart because we've talked about this. How can we bridge those gaps? And really the only way I know is through relational context and through those discussions where we can talk honestly and not label each other and not throw inflammatory words at each other, but we can sit down at the table and we can talk about what the Lord is teaching us. And I think if we want to remain a tribe, a movement, a connected body of churches, and I do, my heart bleeds for this movement. I was born in it, I was raised in it, and I see God doing great things. But if we're going to continue to be that same kind of tribe that God can use, we got to keep talking. We can't let some family members stop coming to the reunion. I'm done.
All right. Well, as I thought about this topic, I thought about my house. I live outside of Philadelphia in a house that was built in 1902. And when you restore an old house, which we have done some of in our house, it's not just about bringing it back to the original condition. If you think about restoration in that context, you might strip off the wallpaper that was put up in 1973. You might rip up the ugly shag carpeting to get back to the original nice floors. But you don't just leave it there, right? You repaint, you polish those floors, you sand them down. It's about taking the skeleton of the original and making it workable for a new generation, making it fit a new generation. Sometimes it also means getting rid of some things, that addition that was added that you no longer need, or the basketball hoop that 2 families ago they put up, right? And at a certain point, the analogy breaks down, but the idea is that restoration is an ongoing process for every generation. And the same thing is true, I think, when it comes to restoring the church. We're not trying to get back to every facet of the New Testament church because culturally, sociologically, we're not the same people as they were. And so, of course, some of the ongoing dialogue about what it means to be the restoration movement is which of the things are eternal, which of the things are cultural, which of the things are temporal. And so as I think about it, I think that as Matt was saying, the next generation of leadership always has to grapple with what that means. And as we do that, it means understanding our heritage, which has always wrestled with unity on the one hand and truth on the other. And in case you haven't noticed, those things are not easy to combine, right? It's really easy to be like way unity, and it's really easy to be way biblical truth. It's really hard to hold that balance, and it was always hard. It was hard for Stone and Campbell. Stone said, "Let Christian unity be our polar star," right? But this is the same guy who rejected substitutionary atonement. He didn't really get on board with the idea of the Trinity. He thought Campbell was kind of a stick in the mud. Campbell thought he was just like, woo, out there, right? So, I mean, these guys had significant differences even at the very beginning of what we think of, maybe sometimes idealistically, as like the glory days of the Restoration movement, you know, when we were all about unity and restoring. It was always messy. It was always messy from the very beginning. And so we have to wrestle with that same messiness, and we have to do it in our context, and we have to be able to, as Matt said, dialogue about what that looks like. And I think there's some things that make that especially difficult for us. And one is that we live in a culture and in a time in which it is possible to avoid conversation with anyone who disagrees with us. We don't have to have unity because we can seek unanimity and just talk to people who just think exactly like we do. It's possible in every area of life, whether we're talking about politics or about religion or about parenting or about what we eat or about, you know. And so we have to be intentional about reaching across some of those divides and having some of those conversations and letting them be messy. I mean, I'm not the scholar that my brothers here are, but my understanding is that there are differences that Stone and Campbell went to the grave with, that they just never resolved. And you know, I think sometimes we get a little bit frustrated and we think that unity means that everybody else in the independent Christian churches has to agree with us on every facet, and that all those inessentials, that they have to agree with us on what the inessentials are, and they have to be the same things that are inessential to us, but all the essentials that we find really important, they have to agree with us on, or otherwise we can't have unity. I think we maybe need a bigger definition of what unity is, and that it doesn't maybe always have to mean agreement on everything. And then that, of course, begs the question, of course, well, which things do we have to agree on? Oh, well, that's time for the Q&A, right? I mean, that is the $64,000 question, is how much can we disagree with each other and still work together? And so that kind of brings me, I think, to my last little point that I wanted to make before I turn it to Ben, which is that we need a motive for unity and restoration. There has to be something. The goal is not just getting along, and the goal is not just being the independent Christian churches and feeling good about ourselves. We need a reason to achieve this messiness between unity and truth, because it is a very hard balance to find. And our motive for that is not doctrinal purity, because again, that was never achieved by anybody. I think their goal when they started out was evangelism. And so we have to wrestle with whether or not we can find that as our goal for unity and for restoration in this century. And if that's not our goal, then we need to figure out why we're so concerned about unity, because it's really about reaching the rest of the world for Christ. And so we need to be able to reach more people for Jesus because of what we're doing. And if we're going to do that, we need to figure out how to do that long-term, messy disagreement stuff. But it has to be about mission.
Well, I disagree. And you're an idiot. So, yeah, actually, I couldn't agree more with. You didn't have a very creative imagination when you pulled this panel together, because we're probably maybe a little too much alike in certain ways. But, boy, it seems like we could just go to Q&A right now. I don't know that I have a lot to add, although that has never kept me from speaking before. So let's start in. I just kind of looking at the big picture, let me just say a couple of things that I always kind of took for granted that everybody knew in this. We use the word tribe, fellowship, movement, like it better than brotherhood or whatever. I think tribe works. I used to take it for granted that everybody kind of knew there's lots of really good things happening in our tribe, and I don't think everybody actually does. I go places where there's a very deep pessimism, sometimes a straw man of some negative legalistic encounter they had with someone from our tribe X number of years ago, and they have fossilized that image in their mind of that's how those Christian churches are. And what I think you are probably seeing when you're out and about, and Jen has a lot of contact nationally as well as a writer, and I have the benefit of being out and about a good bit, maybe in a different part of the country sometimes as well, is there's a lot of good things going on. That's the first thing I would say is the future is complicated because it's not that clear. There's a lot to celebrate. There's a lot to be concerned about. And that's why I think we're having this panel. There's a lot, but in case you didn't know, and you operate maybe in an area where you don't have a sort of sense of what's going on in the whole, there is a ton of really good things happening. And I don't know how I would size that up other than just to say, for example, Ed Stetzer just wrote a blog, and he said what is really needed today is a balance in churches between biblical faithfulness on the one hand and pragmatic effectiveness on the other. And he cited us as a sort of example of that faithful and fruitful. Our churches really care about the Bible, and that's pretty much universal everywhere you go. But there's also this, we really care about getting it done, and let's show some fruit. And groups that just tend to accent one without the other have some problems that, for the most part, we don't tend to have. Bart Rendell just wrote a blog this week with Intentional Churches about 7 things he loves about the independent Christian churches. I encourage you to go check that out. He talked about our blend with evangelism, discipleship. As a unity movement, there was a day I remember at this convention when we were cautioned about having too much contact with those outside of the tribe. We might get polluted and so forth. It was an odd stance for a unity movement. But actually, those aren't our conversations anymore, are they? I mean, there's a lot to celebrate about how our churches are in the center of their communities, helping kind of networks of unity things happen. The megachurch thing, whatever you might think about megachurches, they're reaching a whole bunch of people, and probably per capita, denominationally speaking, we probably have more megachurches per capita of any denomination that I'm aware of. I use the word denomination to simply refer to our tribe. We're a non-denominational denomination, and we know that. Church planting. We're in many ways leading the way in church planting. Some of you maybe attended Exponential East. I think 7,000 people interested in what can I do to become a church planter. Well, that was a movement birthed out of this movement. Many of them still Christian church people. Global missions is soaring in certain ways like it never has. Our colleges, while they have their struggles, are still putting out tremendous students. CIY is like booming off the charts. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students every single week all summer long in Bible Bowl and so forth. So there's lots to be said there. I have conversations all the time with people in the denominational world and the non-denominational free-floating world, okay? These are pastors who are like, how can I get in? So we got guys in our movement that are like, well, sort of tired, yawn, how do I get out? Or I don't appreciate it. And it's ironic that we have so many others going. And here's what they see. They see, on the one hand, enough freedom that, like a denominational world, kind of sometimes squishes down. You can't come up with a new idea and run it because you can't get it by the bishop or whoever. Can't get the denomination to buy in. We can't try anything new. So we have this open spirit that sort of rewards creative, spiritual entrepreneurship, and you can try stuff. Even if it's dumb, you can still try it. And no one can tell you no. That's the plus side of our open-spirited independence. And at the same time, there's enough of a network. I have some non-denominational friends who are free floaters, solo Christians out there with churches that are not connected to any tribe, who are desperate for being able to make a bigger imprint. They can't plant churches. They can't do missions because they can't do it all by themselves, and they don't have anyone else to connect to because they didn't want to do the denominational world, but now they're free floating and stuck. And we have this weird, strange, somewhat incestuous network where everybody sort of knows everybody, and there's this connection where those relationships are how churches get planted and colleges get funded and mission still happens, and we need this connection. This tribe has to have some kind of network like that to continue. So I just wanted, before we jumped in on some of the concerns, I would say, don't forget, there's a lot of good things going on. There's rapid growth, there's a lot of things we mentioned. Now that said, even describing the concerns I found difficult because who are we talking about? We're talking about our tribe. Now what's that? Well, we're saying, Mark said, independent Christian churches. Now who's that? And you start pressing into that, and it's an interesting family we're a part of, isn't it? You've got white, rural, Midwestern folk. You've got urban Latinos. You've got African Americans, you've got megachurch, you've got small church, East Coast, West Coast, all different views on so many different things, thriving churches, dying churches. The one thing we are not is uniform and homogeneous. That's the one thing we're not. And I think increasingly what we're sensing, a lot of us, maybe you, is that the cohesive elements that have defined us and allowed us to cohere together are weakening. Some of those were kind of culturally bound or time bound in certain ways. Well, we've achieved, we don't have some of the common enemies we used to have. We don't have in some of the institutions that have bound us historically. Our colleges aren't necessarily some of the unifying factors as much as they once were. This convention isn't a convention that a lot of people feel is that important to attend or wouldn't see it as important to what they're doing in their work, and yet they'd still say, oh, I'm a Christian church. The magazine, which we're celebrating 150 years, has seen a decline in readership. Maybe there's another generation that just, I don't know, want to come up with something on our own, or we're not sure exactly what all that means. But the point is, the points of cohesion are weakening, and so I think Jen's exactly right. All of the seeds of that were born in the movement from the beginning. There were lots of tensions and differences from the very beginning with the first handshakes. They never went away, ever. In fact, they eventually led to a couple other more permanent splits. And what we're all trying to figure out is there enough cohesion to overcome the sort of outward thrust? Remember those tilt-a-whirls at the fair? You sit in you strap yourself up in the cage, and then they start that thing like a big record player with humans on it, and you feel your guts pressing against the outer wall. That's centrifugal force, and it thrusts everything out from the center. And the only thing that keeps you from flying out into the next ride over is the cage. And it's like we had that cage so distinctly at the beginning. When you look at the life cycle of a movement, it begins with an urgency and a need to fill and a problem to answer, and we had that. We don't all agree on what the problems are and what the needs are anymore. It moves through a sort of building and bureaucratization stage, a stabilization stage. We've moved that. Now movements then come inevitably to a place of decline where either they move into obsolescence or they are renewed. And what's happening is the renewal efforts within our tribe aren't bought into by everyone. And so we are having a sort of fissure within, I think, about what really do we want to mostly go back and try to recreate what we used to be? Are we going to move forward? And if so, who gets to decide what we really care about now? At one point, the editors kind of held us together, the editors of the Christian Standard, the writers, the early writers. And then it sort of became Bible college presidents were the sort of big dogs that we wanted to go to the conferences to hear a Bible college professor speak. Then the sort of heir apparent became the megachurch dudes. They all became the ones we wanted to hear, and they're sort of on the wane, I think, now, although they still got some money, so we have to keep them around. But now it's the bloggers and the church planners, and who knows, but there's no clear sense of who's going to help lead us collectively forward, because how do you lead us collectively forward? So I'm trying to paint the picture of the tenuousness which has always been part of us, which now is just exacerbated by the particular tensions and centrifugal force in our time. So you had 3, I don't know how many I have, but I do have a couple that I wanted to say I see as inflection points.
Are they alliterative?
They do spell a word. If you take the first letter of each one, I have no idea what that is, but I'm sure you can come up with one. So I would just call these inflection points. These are what I see as just observations. I'm not trying to make value statements about these as much as observations. You can decide which side of these you come down on, but that's my point is, in each of these areas, I feel like they're conversations where certain people among us feel like, well, you don't speak for me, I don't agree with that. Or I don't think, I see that this is moving, but I don't like the way it's moving. Or I think it needs to move more, but I don't feel like others are wanting to move with us. So those are inflection points. The old, what's the Chinese thing that we always say, the word for crisis supposedly has 2 characters that are combined. It means danger and opportunity. I guess linguists are saying it's not so true, but it sounds good, so we still use that illustration. So, but these are things I would say are like that. They're crisis in that sense. They're dangerous to our cohesion. But there are also tremendous opportunities, and the verdict is out on all of them. Let me just tell you what I think some of them are. And each of these deserves a fuller discussion. But I see, number one, I see us evolving hermeneutically. Hermeneutics, you know, is the way we read the Bible. We've always prided ourselves on being people who said, hey, we just read the Bible, that's all we do. The Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it. And we all kind of like the sound of that, except that the honest truth is, if I just say, well, I just read the Bible and say, I just do what it says, that's a nice way of me saying, it says what I mean it says. Because we all know that there is actually the role of interpretation. There's actually a sort, we all love the text, everyone loves the text, but figuring out what the text actually meant and how to apply it today is not something that everyone all agrees on. I guess we all probably know this, right? Christians don't actually agree on every non-essential, and we're all reading the same Bible. So we're starting to admit that a little more than maybe we did in our earlier days, that, yeah, good, God-fearing, really smart, honest, Bible-trusting, Jesus-fearing people are reading the same text, and not by trying to play fast and loose with things, are coming up with sort of different understandings about what would be the best way to be faithful to Jesus today. And there's an evolution that's happening in our hermeneutics in this way. And by the way, this is what has always been the dividing line in our tribe. We just haven't always admitted it. It's what happened with the a cappella. It's what happened with the disciples in the 50s. It's what's happening now within us. And so my contention would be, back to Jen's point, let's go back to our best mantra, which is in essentials unity, non-essentials liberty, and commit to actually having unity around a really short list that has to do with Jesus alone. That will be enough to cohere a movement, allowing for some different hermeneutics that say, you know, I think that you should look at it this way or that way. One of the outworkings of this, for example, is the women in ministry issue. You know, there are many people who believe that that women ought to serve and lead and teach and preach, not because they sort of want to give a wink or a sort of ignore certain parts of the Bible, but precisely because they think that's the best fulfillment of exactly what the gospel is teaching. You've got others who are reading the same New Testament and saying, I think these words right here really mean the same thing today. Back to your sort of, is this cultural then, or is it all time? So within our movement, we have people who really feel very strong. We have many churches with women elders, some who think that would be just the worst thing in the world, and I don't know how you can get there. And that's a tribe. And I think we just simply have to say, this is a tribe that can hold together and allow for that evolution. But that evolution can have the potential for dividing us exactly as it has in the past. It would be a shame. It doesn't need to, because our mission is bigger than that. You don't have to sort of run and take your ball and go home with everyone just every time someone disagrees with you on something that you think is important. And no one's allowed to put their pet stuff up on top and say, well, this is non-negotiable. It's the gospel. Jesus is what's non-negotiable. No one gets to put their non-essentials up there in the essential list. That's not fair. Don't do it. Second, we're broadening politically. We have, at an earlier, simple time, I think we were largely fairly uniform, wouldn't you say? Fairly consistent in how we tended to default and think about things politically as a tribe, as a fellowship. But that frame of reference is broadened and changed. It's no longer the case as we become more racially diverse, because the millennials are coming up and they're all screwed up politically. They don't know what they think. They've got all kinds of different views, certainly different than their parents' generation. And as those people ascend into leadership, it's bringing a different perspective. And so we're not all on the same page that way, and that has stretched us. It wasn't that long ago that a North American I attended someone came up to me during it and said, I felt like I just attended the Republican National Convention. And the odd thing is that most people thought it was as well and liked it. And nowadays, that would be something that would really not sit well with a whole bunch of people in this tribe, because we've changed so much from a sort of uniform political perspective. And part of that is the millennials, but when you have a different political frame of reference, it changes then how you read the Bible about how you think you should treat the poor. It changes how you look at creation care. It changes a little bit how you tend to approach the race issue and a number of other things. So the way I see that playing out is, and I don't want to take more than my time, but you were pretty short, Matt, so I'm going to take yours and then mine. I think that on a lot of issues, you've got really good people that are kind of on opposing sides of really good issues. So, for example, let's talk about creation care and the environment. And so, because many among us would say, well, that agenda has been pushed hard by people that I consider liberals that I don't trust and respect in a political environment, we kind of trained ourselves to sort of get on the other end of the tug of war and pull against that. So you find a lot of Christians today, ironically, kind of being sort of anti anything that has to do with environmental or global warming and this kind of thing, when it seems like that, when you read the Bible, it seems like should have been one of our big things. It's like it is kind of on the first page of the Bible about taking care of the planet and entrusting us with that. And yet we find ourselves not wanting to be politically correct, so we find ourselves sometimes fighting other Christians on these issues because of a political deal. Taking care of the poor, race issues, and so forth, I think can be same thing could be said. Third, I think I see us widening racially and ethnically. I think we've got a long way to go, but I don't need to comment on that. It's been talked about already. I think I see us, fourthly, grappling theologically. I think in the early days we probably would have been defined by our sort of doctrinal differentiation as over against other tribes. That's clearly not the case anymore. One of the distinctives of a movement is that they have a distinctive identity. They have a common enemy. And they have a network of informal relationships. Well, we don't really have a common enemy anymore because we're getting along with a whole lot of people. We have more unity. And we don't have a distinctive worship style. We don't have a distinctive theology per se. We've blended in to evangelicalism at large to a significant degree. Now, theologically, there's a lot of things that we would say, we really have something to offer. This sacramental view of ours that elevates baptism to really mean something, this deal where communion is substantive and actually there's something really happening in our worship context when we do it, that's worth clinging to. We have something to bring to the table. But few of us are willing to say that's all we want to be known for anymore. And I'm not sure we ever should have been only known for those things. And so it leaves this sort of question mark, how are we going to grapple theologically with who we are and what we're about? And that's where I would lead us right back to Jen's thing about it's got to be something bigger than doctrinal differentiation. We've got to think bigger than our movement, than our church. We've got to learn to think about the end game of the kingdom of God, and the mission of Jesus Christ is what this movement was birthed for, and the only reason it makes sense to still exist. Jesus said he could raise up descendants of Abraham out of stones if he wanted to, and he can do his work through any old movement he wants to. I think we should just find out whatever way we need to get in the flow, the stream of God's mighty river that's flowing. He's going to get his work done through somebody. I want a piece of that action. And if it isn't going to happen here, I'll go somewhere else. That's how we all ought to look at it. Hold it loosely. It's a movement, not something that is supposed to be a sort of institution we're meant to perpetuate at all costs. If it's going to move, it's got to have the Spirit of God alive and moving in it. So as we grapple with these issues, let's find what God is doing and do that, but let's not throw the baby out with the baptistry water, because there's a tremendous deposit of networking and relationships and friendships and history. And I'm not talking about institutional loyalty. I'm talking about it's foolish for kingdom gain if we don't figure out how to maximize what you're seeing this week at the North American Christian Convention, not so we feel good about ourselves being back on top, but so that the kingdom of God is advanced. So it's bad stewardship and foolish if we don't figure out how to bring whatever these cohesive and divisive factors are to the place where we can move this thing forward again. And that's going to take a lot of humility. It's going to take a lot of moving across lines and recognizing that at the family reunion, you got some uncles you just as soon not have time with, but they're part of the family, and let's celebrate that because we're better together than we are apart. So those are some of the things I guess I would say. I think the other tension inflection points, I'll mention one more, as we engage culturally around LGBT, particularly is a big one right now. There again, this is a tinderbox. If we primarily see this as an agenda we've got to fight, or a people group we've somehow got to defend ourselves against, if we primarily see it as a cultural war we've got to win and we're an army in that fight, it's very hard at the same time to have your number one agenda being our mission is to reach people for Christ who might happen to be gay. You can't say at the same time, we're against you and we love you. You've got to figure out which message it is. Now, grace and truth have no trouble cohering together. We just have a hard time sometimes knowing what to lead with. And I think we've got to figure out if we're going to lead with, we're a church where people who are same-sex attracted can find a relationship with Christ, or whether we think our primary mission is to root out this scourge of our society, because you can't do both as a church. You win people to Christ through the power of Christ. So I'm telling you that my opinion is that this is an issue that has the potential, if we lean on this too heavily, too fast in certain ways that disrespect other voices who are trying their best, we're going to create those fissures and drive them even deeper. So those are some of my thoughts about it. I think there's some tension points that I think deserve a lot of care and humility.
Well, one thought I had, and I would like to think of this as a conversation.
That's what I was going to do next.
Yeah.
Say, you talk to each other a little bit.
Okay, so one thought that I had is that we don't have a common enemy the way we did when we were fighting those big bad denominations. And I wonder if maybe that's one of the reasons why we're kind of finding each other to be enemies. We're creating kind of sub-movements within our movement. And I don't know that consciously that would be why, that we one day somebody woke up and said, well, there's nobody external to us to fight, so let's fight with each other. But I see it happening. And so we're choosing some of these issues, and we're kind of creating dividing lines even within our movement. And I do agree with you that if we're not careful, we could splinter yet again over some of these issues, because some of the people on different sides of these issues consider them very much to be doctrinal essentials. And so I don't know that there's a question there, or that's just a comment, and something that I've thought as I've seen dialogue around issues about what women can and can't do, or what the homosexual issue, or even the racial concerns that are in our churches. That there's a very real, because I think some of the response to it would be, well, that's all well and good, Ben, Jen, and Matt, but that isn't essential, because it is black and white. And so when you have people whose perspectives are that different, it can be hard to find the common ground.
Yeah, and I think the appeal is for all of us to, that humility that you both spoke about, is to hold loosely some of our cherished personal agendas, preferences, if we think cohering together is worth it. If we don't, then don't worry about it. Just do your thing. But if you're with me and you believe that we can plant more churches, send more missionaries, have more vital encouragement with each other than we ever could do if we all just went solo kingdom vigilantes, then you got to behave like you're part of a family. And the only way that I would do that is if the bottom line entry requirement was the mission of Jesus Christ, period. And I'm just going to have to agree that my brothers in Uganda and my sisters in Kenya and China might go about it differently, but if I know I can look them in the eye and they tell me Jesus is Lord, and that's about all I need. So you might have others you want to squeeze up into that top list, but it really is in essentials unity. We just don't practice that very, very well all the time. Now, our tribe has more distinctives than that. I want to say one more thing about that. Thank you for the invitation to do so.
Do you have anything else to add to that, Ben?
Yeah, I do, Matt.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'd like to hear one more thing if you have it.
To Jen's point, you've all maybe experienced this in your church, where someone's kind of grumbling about something. It's everything from the music to something that's just hard for them personally. An older woman having trouble with the music or something like that, who then comes back to you. Yeah, not calling out names, Becky, but who later comes back to you and says, my grandkid is committing their life to Christ. This young family that is now disciples of Jesus and going to the mission field because of what's happening. Life change and mission advancement have a way of quelling these inner squabbles. When there is, I'm not talking about shallow version of pragmatic success. I mean when there's kingdom advancement, and that is actually the win. That's the target. And if you hit that, I tell you what, it's amazing how we're willing to sort of put into a secondary place, even very important. I care very much about these issues, but I'm willing to put them second if we get that.
I think Bob Russell used to put it something like this. It's the soldiers in the barracks that get into fights with each other. It's not the soldiers on the battle lines. They're all focused that way, together, shoulder to shoulder.
What else you want to say? Anything else in response to all this? So I'd like to take the temperature of the crowd. This is we've got a giant graph across the room. This is a 1 on this side. This is a 10 on this side. This side 1 represents discouraged, devastated, depressed. 10 represents excited, energized, ready to go. 5 represents sort of pondering and wondering about all that we've heard or all that you thought before you came in. So let's see how many 1 to 4s we have in the room. Oh, come on, you can admit it if you're discouraged.
What are you talking about their personal ministry or about the
I'm
restoration
talking about how
movement as a
they're
whole?
responding to the
About what you
we've
said.
heard.
About what Matt said?
About what you said.
About what Matt said,
or
yeah.
about Ben
About
or
what Ben
Jen
said,
or
yeah.
I'd really like to know what we're grading here.
Okay.
This really
I
matters
just
to
want to know how
me.
you feel about the future of our movement based on this discussion of it this afternoon so far in this half hour, 45 minutes. Okay, is that better? Is that clear? All right, that's good. So 1 is discouraged, 5 is energized, 5 is 10. Yeah, thank you. 5 is sort of I'm still kind of I'm not sure how I feel about this. So how many people we got on the 1 to 4 side over here? Kind of discouraged about the future or really upset about the possibility. How many energized people ready to roll based on what we've heard this afternoon? A few. How many we got in the 5 range here? Okay, and you're the ones I want to hear from. Why? What are your concerns? Well, would you verbalize a concern? Okay, back here, brother.
Yeah, try to keep your remarks concise if you can.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah. I'm wondering if there are questions. Is there a question to ask of our panel? Let's put it that way. Okay, this gentleman in green. Thank you. I'm going to repeat this for the tape, and I have no way of repeating what you said, brother. So, yeah. What's the role of the convention in the next 10 years? Anybody want to wax eloquent, wax prophetic on that?
Gene Apple's in the back of the room. We're
Gene,
trying to get our
come on
cues
up here,
from him.
Gene.
What should we
Come
say?
on up
What
here,
should we not
Gene.
say?
Oh,
Honestly,
Gene's gonna answer that. Okay.
yeah, you've got a great guy here to answer. Here, you take mine.
Thank you. Thank you.
I got to be ready for the rebuttal.
I'll be glad to share if all of you will register for Kansas City next year in 2017. Hey, the reason Ben asked, I think, pointed to me back in the room, this fascinating discussion, is I have the privilege to serve on the Board of Stewards of the North American Christian Convention, and we're asking that very question that you're asking these days. Last fall, some of you know there's a continuation committee of 120 people, real cross-representation of people from all across the country who come together every fall and again every summer to help plan, guide, speak into the future of the convention. And last fall in October when we gathered in Louisville, we all knew that there were some serious questions that we had to get clarity on about the future of the convention. Why do we exist? What brings us together? The financial model that we have is very expensive and you play it out over time. The model itself is unsustainable, so there's some things that are going to have to be adjusted to make it a more financially sustainable convention. And so we divided up into groups. There's 120 people on the continuation committee last fall, had all kinds of fascinating discussions about why do we exist, who's our primary audience, what do we want to move the convention forward on, and then from that input, the Board of Stewards has been going through a strategic operating dreaming process this last year. And we've been working on some ideas, and we're coming back to that conversation at our meeting this October with the 120 person continuation committee. And I just have to say, having had the privilege to sit on the inside of those discussions and having attended my first North American Christian Convention when I was 4 years old, and having been a part of this all of my life, the kinds of discussions that we're having, I've never been more excited about the future of this convention, more excited about to be a part of this tribe and this movement and where we're going. And I think we have some clarity as we look forward to the future about producing, and the phrase that we're using these days is to equip and inspire leaders that of a movement that produce healthy, growing churches. And the healthy growing part is we're just saying that this is just Great Commission stuff. It's making and growing and developing disciples. And how can we do that? And how can we come together in a way that charges up churches, fires up churches, equips churches, so that we really move the needle for kingdom advancement? So that we don't just come and say, hey, it was like church camp for a week when we were church camp for big people, for a week when we got together in the summer. But we come together this summer saying, hey, remember where our churches were at last year? We've made progress, and leaders are growing, and we've encouraged each other. And one of the great passions that I'm seeing emerge from this is, thank you for allowing me to be brief, is, I get fired up about this, is that you don't have to do this alone. None of us have to do this alone. That's the beauty of being a part of a movement like this. We get to do it together. We get to encourage each other. We get to lift each other up. And one of the great passions that I have is with the privilege to lead this gathering next year is I want every person who comes to feel like I'm a part of something bigger than myself. We're better together than we could be by ourselves. And when we're weak, this is a gathering that lifts me up. When I'm discouraged, this is a gathering that encourages me. And you're not alone. And we do it together. And that's a vision I can get fired up for. And that's a vision I'd like to, whatever years God gives me with the rest of my life, I'm fired up to doing whatever I can to make that happen, just personally. So thank you. I'm really glad I popped in.
So with that speech, I think we've probably got a few more tens. I think he may have moved the temperature this direction a little better than we were able to do. Well, I think that's a good way to end with that encouraging speech there. The fact is, we're all going to have different feelings, and we're all going to have different sets of concerns, and we're all going to have different opportunities to encourage each other and to stay connected with each other. There are a number of ways that we try to stay connected with each other. The North American is one of them. Certainly the Christian Standard is another one of them. We are trying to tell these exciting stories that people don't know. We're trying to provide a platform for people to discuss issues about which they may disagree or about which there needs to be clarity. Churches like Ben's church are buying 100 of them and to distribute them every month to all of their key leaders. And we think as people participate with us in the ministry of Christian Standard, we can have a wider ministry to guarantee a stronger future for the sake of the future of the Christian churches. And so that's our anniversary wish on our 150th anniversary. Sean wants to
Can I say one word before Sean closes out?
We got about 20 minutes if you want to talk about.
No, I won't. I won't do that. But I just want to put in he works for Christian Standard. We volunteer, and it's because we believe in what this magazine can do, what the Lord can do. As Ben said, there's only a few of these cohesion points. And I just want to encourage you, if you have not been a recent reader of the Christian Standard, pick one up while you're here at the convention, there at the booth, and read that, and then share that. Download the app, because there's great stuff, and it will not only equip you, but it will connect you. It's this thing that we're talking about that Gene just fired us up about, of being together, working together for this mission, and this is a great tool. So if you have not been a reader, let me encourage you, give it a try. I'm done.
A round of applause for our panel here. I love the idea that positive outcomes are possible. We serve a big God. And so just let me pray briefly over you all in this room, our panel and other leaders. Father God, thank you so much for your love, for your grace, and that you have a plan. Help us be bold with steps of faith, with innovation and pioneering, Lord, that bears kingdom fruit. Help pave the way and make our path clear. Your blessings upon us all. Amen. Thank you.